point about authenticity. When it comes to campaigns, I think if you look closely at what's happening, I think almost every brand will discover that people are telling the story of how they use and experience the products in a way probably that's not only more authentic but more powerful than you could probably ever build into a campaign. And I think if you start looking at those stories and trying to find the people who are having great experiences and build campaigns around them, build campaigns that amplify those stories. And to an extent, I think you have to be comfortable letting go of the control of the messaging. But there's a great deal of value, I think, in finding those people.
A great example of that is the Blend Tech Will It Blend series. I'm sure how many people have seen the Will It Blend videos? You could see that as a campaign, but it was an accidental campaign. And they discovered that in the lab where they were testing their blenders by putting weird shit into the blender. The CEO was testing it by putting a rake handle into the blender and see if it would blend it, right? Because if a blender can blend a rake handle, it'll do a margarita pretty well, right? And he didn't even think about it. The CEO didn't think about this, but an employee came in and saw all the sawdust everywhere and said, "What the hell are you doing?" And he said, "Oh, I was just blending a rake handle." He goes, "We should film that, put it on YouTube." Right? And that became a worldwide hit. Now it's every week they have another thing. Will it blend it, an iPad or whatever? And that was an accidental campaign that they discovered just by playing around with the stories that they want to talk about publicly, right? Anything else? Yeah.
A comment that I'm looking for reaction, because I think,
I'm sorry.
comment that I'm looking for each of the panelists to react to, because I think for me at least the definition of the campaign relates to the time. So the difference with Old Spice being the week versus Will It Blend being continuous, I feel with Old Spice it was neat, but I was kind of sold a bill of goods. I got taken out to a really nice dinner and then didn't get called. Is that me, or is that a common perception as it relates to what's the consistency of the campaign, and is that the dividing line in terms of where success or genuine relationships are?
It's certainly my perception, and I think yours as well. Compare that to Samsung. Samsung has an ongoing relationship campaign with bloggers and journalists, and they also have a story. They have the best of breed in all of the sizes of screens, right? They have a great 7-inch, they have a great phone, they have a great laptop, they have a great big screen, and they have a consistent story that the whole company is telling all at once, and they're using a campaign with the social media guys to get that story amplified and told into the public sphere. Yeah.
So is it about campaigns, or is it more how social media can change the culture of a company, and is that what it should be? Because I think that question over there is what a lot of people grapple with. It's not a campaign. How do you change and work on the culture of a company to think differently using social media?
That gets back to the first session this morning. Let me hear you guys answer.
I wasn't here.
When it comes to the culture of a company, I think for the most part, everyone is pretty, as a PR agent, all of my clients are very wary of talking. They've been misquoted, or they've been quoted exactly what they said, but that's not what they wanted to have quoted. And so the idea of going out and broadcasting is very foreign to almost every company out there, and there's always this kind of lead up for it. You have to convince them that they want to be listening first, and then you have to convince them that they want to be responding. And then you have to convince them that they want to be a little bit more authentic with their responses, instead of it being, oh, buy our tablet. You're actually talking to them and having a conversation. And I think what you have to do is you have to go and look at these companies that have done it successfully and show the ROI of it, show how it's been beneficial to the company. Comcast Care is a really good example of how changing the culture in the end affected the bottom line and really makes them a better company. And so you have to show what other people have done. And it is an arduous battle to get the culture to change. The culture doesn't change overnight, and it certainly doesn't change with one person starting a Twitter handle. That's not going to do it.
I also would say that I encounter a lot of companies that have an inherent fear about doing things live. And it's only now that we're getting to the point where there's the technology and there's the bandwidth to be able to have effective live two-way conversations.
Yeah.
I would also say that that most companies, if you got down to it with them, would agree that if you get to the point where you're having a conversation with your potential customer, that's probably taking you pretty far along to getting to the point where you're successfully evangelizing about your product.
But they're scared of that. I had lunch yesterday with Audi's CEO, and one of the PR guys says, well, you know, you have a choice. You can film it, or you can not film it. If you don't film it, you'll probably get more candid answers. Well, I turned it off for a little while and just listened for a couple minutes, and I noticed the quality of the conversation was awesome. I turned it on, and the conversation didn't go down because they didn't even notice it at that point. They were engaged in the conversation, talking with the journalists and stuff like that. And I put it, it's a great conversation. But there's so much fear of people that they are going to say something wrong, piss off their coworkers, get PR yelling and screaming, even though the PR guy was sitting right next to them. Yeah. How do we get people over this fear?
I think there's also a direct correlation, from my perspective, between the companies who understand social media as a whole. The ones who are starting to do things the most effectively are also the ones who understand that they've got to take a chance with some of these newer things. And I find a lot less resistance from those companies who will come to me and say, wow, can we take your platform and embed it live on Facebook and bring 200,000 people and let them interact in real time with people from our company. Now, 20 years ago, or 5 years ago, that would create a huge amount of trepidation amongst the senior people in a company, knowing how are we going to manage this from a PR perspective? What if somebody says something wrong? What do we do? But there's a balance, and I see a definite shift to people starting to accept this.
Live video, you won't get misquoted because the video is
exactly. Well, the nice thing about Watch 2, and I just played with it this week, but I think a lot of the fear of saying the wrong thing, getting out there and putting your message in the wrong place is the backlash that you're going to get. And the online is a scary place, especially when you have people who can come and comment and talk about anything and twist what you're saying. And putting a live face to it, taking that person who's making a comment, bringing them up and being able to see them and have that connection takes so much of the fear of the unknown away. And I think a lot of companies are going to really embrace that, being able to personalize.
I agree, and we've also seen over the last year or two a lot of examples where companies do something wrong. And that happens in every company. But then you see the ones who fess up and don't try to cover it up and come straight to the public and say, this is what happened, and this is why it happened, and this is hopefully why it won't happen again. Even though there was a mistake made, they garner a huge amount of credibility for their legitimacy that I think in some cases transcends the mistake.
We have to wrap up. Is there one last question? Yeah.
So whether it's the Old Spice example that we were talking about, launching campaigns but not continuing the conversation, so whether you use them as, what not to do, can you explain what they should have done, or talk about someone who does it right, like specifically launches a campaign? You keep putting content out there, like what do you do to keep it going?
In that case, I would say, treat it like a TV season. Okay. And say, hey, there's going to be another one someday. And, and keep in touch with people. Join our mailing list to hear about it. Maybe we'll have a Twitter account where we tweet, funny things once in a while and retweet, what happened and have maybe a blog from the actor and what he's doing today. But then try it again in 6 more months and see if you can get a better reaction and keep experimenting with it and use the numbers to guide you where you take it next.
They really need to be two different things. You need to have a baseline support that is constantly running, and then you need to have campaigns that can kind of spike it, that can bring in interest. You can measure those, but you always have to be there. I think that's what they did wrong. They kind of started and blew it up, and then they didn't continue in any way. And so having a baseline there, like you were saying, is really essential.
Completely agree on that too. So, one of the things our team is doing is looking at, for our key segments, the key audiences we want to reach, who are the people that we can create programs with that last the entire year. It's completely agnostic of tools, completely agnostic of campaigns and programs. But when those things come along, suddenly we have this rich relationship and all the rich content that we can contribute. But the baseline is really about maintaining those relationships and those conversations.
So I hate to interject, but the event organizer, CES, says, Steve, you've got to keep this thing on schedule. He pulled me aside and said, are you going to get your act together? I said, yes. So I want to thank our panelists very much. Robert, thank you.